11 games on the NBA slate tonight. That's kind of crazy. And thank the high heavens, we have DraftKings contributors Garion, Thorne, and Matt Meiselman, along with RotoWire's Nick Whalen here to help you build some money-making lineups. Okay, dudes, real quick. Celtics proving all three of you wrong last night, but hold up. How about over 244.5 points hitting between the Hornets and T-Wolves? 'Twas a thing of beauty, Nick.
It sure was. It certainly was. And it did not look like it was going to hit for most of the night. I think the game was in like the 80s or even the low 90s at the end of the third quarter, but we were blessed with overtime. The gods were looking out for us. Matt, I can't believe you went under on that. I think we were called by God to take the over in this one, and he made it happen.
Absolute coward, Matt. You really are.
It got there by 1 point despite overtime. I didn't bet on the game. I'm happy I had nothing. That would have been too much stress, win or lose. I'm happy to not be involved.
Yeah, Gare Bear, you were sweating it out, weren't you, bud?
Oh, no. I knew overtime was implied. If you looked at the trends, it was pretty clear that game was going to overtime. I mean, why would the total be that high if it wasn't going to overtime? That's the kind of question you have to ask yourself.
Exactly. By the way, guys, Karl Anthony Towns with nearly 69 DK fantasy points in that one. Garion, he in Minnesota hosting your Raptors tonight, I believe. So who's worthy of building around at the center spot? Also, the Joker topping all salaries at 12-4.
I mean, it might just be Towns. We've got to wait on a lot of news on this particular slate. I mean, there could even be like some rogue rest days out there. It is a lot of these teams' last game before the All-Star break. So this slate could be a weird one, but I do think as things stand right now, Towns is underpriced at just 10,000. A lot of this though does ride on the health and status of Anthony Edwards, because Towns' role changes in significant ways when Edwards is unavailable. So far this season, he basically goes from a 28% usage rate playing alongside Edwards to a 34.2% usage rate when Edwards is off the court. He averages 1.5 DraftKings points per minute when Edwards is unavailable. So if he does sit out, which I would think is the likelier scenario of him playing or not playing, I mean, relatively, I don't want to say severe ankle sprain, but like an ankle injury on the first night of a back-to-back, 1 game removed from the All-Star break. I think Edwards probably ends up sitting tonight. And then there's just the fact that, while the Raptors are an above-average defensive team, they just don't have the size. They don't have a singular player with the size who can handle someone like Karl Anthony Towns. So I think really this is a great matchup for him, and it could be even better if Edwards is unavailable.
Okay, Nick, what are you doing at center?
Yeah, I mean, you got plenty of options on this 11-game slate. Jokic, Towns, Vucevic, AD, assuming he plays, Siakam, Sabonis, Nurkic. I mean, there's a ton of directions that you could go in. I will definitely have some Jokic exposure just to cover my bases there. And Gary made a lot of good points about Karl Anthony Towns. I, too, would be surprised if Anthony Edwards plays in this game. I mean, he's got to rest up for the Rising Stars game this weekend. Obviously, that's top of mind for him. I think I like Vucevic the most of that group based on the price. You can get him at 9,900 against Sacramento. The Kings have been bad against centers all season. That does not change whatsoever with the arrival of Sabonis. And I would even consider Sabonis on the other side of that matchup. Chicago, too, has struggled to defend centers this season. You're saving $1,000 if you go with Sabonis. He's at 8,900. The Kings let me down in a pretty big way against Brooklyn the other night. Basically no-showed that game despite being road favorites against a team that had lost 11 straight. But I think they probably lose at Chicago tonight, but it should be a much better fantasy night for Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, Vucevic, by the way, 54-plus DraftKings points in 3 of his last 4 games. Gets that weak front court of the Kings. Matt, who's your center?
Well, I feel like I have to make this pick now because this would be the first segment we've had where this player wasn't mentioned as the center pick, and it's Pascal Siakam. I feel like we're always talking about Siakam, but for tonight specifically, the Wolves just played an overtime game last night. The team could be a little tired. It probably hurts their defense just a bit. It's a back-to-back either way, so that definitely makes it worse. But Fred VanVleet's on the injury report, and if he doesn't play, then we just have to take a hard look at all of the Raptors. So this is a slate where I think a lot of guys could benefit from certain players being out. Siakam benefits a lot if VanVleet doesn't play. With the season being close to the All-Star break at this point, I think it just kind of makes sense that guys that are banged up just take it easy. You don't want to get a serious injury right before the break. This is the last game before the All-Star game for a lot of teams. So it kind of makes sense. I think Garion said it with Edwards. With VanVleet, I think they just take it easy with him. And then if he doesn't play, Siakam has a lot more usage and just a lot more to do.
All right, Nick, which forward do you think is a must play, someone you're going to build around? We got LeBron, who's questionable here, and then DeMar DeRozan has put up, at least 52 DK fantasy points in 5 of his last 6?
Yeah, 6 straight 35-plus point games for DeMar DeRozan, 7 straight 30-point games. First player since Michael Jordan in a Bulls uniform to accomplish those. I mean, he's been ridiculous. There's really no argument to go against DeMar DeRozan at this point, and I kind of like a DeRozan-Vucevic stack against that Sacramento defense. So that's one build that I'll certainly be considering. I mean, you mentioned LeBron. He's probably going to play 10,500. You see that Utah matchup, and it's like ingrained in my mind that that's a defense you want to avoid, but it really hasn't been the case for a lot of this season, and LeBron has essentially been matchup-proof as well. I'll also highlight Julius Randle, who is at 9,700. It feels like it's been a disastrous season for Julius Randle, and compared to last year for him and the Knicks, it kind of has, but he is starting to look more like that guy, at least fantasy-wise, over these last few games. His last 4, he's gone for 63, 56, 61, and 58 DraftKings points. So even though the Knicks are 1-3 over that stretch, even though he's had some costly turnovers late in a couple of those games, the fantasy production has still been there. So Julius Randle, 9,700, you see that tag. It maybe doesn't add up to what his reputation has been this year, but he's been pretty solid the last couple of weeks as a fantasy asset.
All right, Matty, where are you going at forward?
Yeah, I could save this guy for a value play, but there are so many value plays. I think we can just find cheap players everywhere. Assuming Anthony Edwards doesn't play tonight, I think Jaden McDaniels is someone that we definitely have to look at, $3,500. What could work in our favor is if Edwards winds up being a game-time decision and then gets ruled out after lock, I don't think a lot of people will have McDaniels. He's the likely starter, I think. I think I'm reading the situation right, that he's the guy who would slot into the starting lineup. He seems to play as a starter whenever anyone in the Wolves starting lineup is out, just kind of their 6th man, no matter who isn't there. But yeah, if people are locking in cheaper players in the 7 o'clock window, 7:30, and then we get Edwards ruled out after that, I think the ownership on McDaniels ends up being a lot lower than some other guys. But this is a slate with a ton of value plays, which is why I think we're talking about some expensive players too. By the time we get around to lock, I think we're going to be looking at a lot of stars and a lot of scrubs that are all pretty viable.
Gary Bear, forward you like. Sounds like a lot of options, expensive and not so expensive.
Yeah, I mean, Nick was kind of laying it out there. I mean, you've got DeRozan, you've got Siakam, you've got Sabonis. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can go and feel really good about it at the forward position. I do think it's worth mentioning Kyle Kuzma. He's $8,600 tonight. He's got that magical matchup we've been talking about the last couple of weeks against the Pacers, who have just decided to stop playing defense, it would seem. Who can blame them? But they are giving up 122 points per 100 possessions across their last 5 games. That is the worst mark in the entire Eastern Conference. And Kuzma's kind of reached that really special territory where right now he appears to be leading the Wizards in every single important offensive category. Across his last 3 starts, he even leads the team in potential assists per game. So you've just got a guy who's constantly on triple-double watch because Kuzma's already an elite rebounder for his position. It's a pretty good scorer. So I just think against a terrible defense like Indiana, you're getting some nice value here on someone like Kuzma, who you just don't find that role with a lot of guys.
I think it's safe to say he's the primary playmaker on that Wizards offense. All right, let's.
Raul Neto?
No, sorry to burst your bubble there. Matty, who's a guard you should build your lineups around?
Well, he's a forward too, but I like Buddy Hield for tonight. And I think this mid-range is where players are probably going to get overlooked, especially if more guys get ruled out. We're going to see it just becomes so much easier to fit in cheaper players. Buddy Hield, 6,200. He's guard and forward eligible, so I guess that helps. But this is a game that should have a lot of points between the Wizards and the Pacers. The offenses aren't great, but the defenses are definitely worse than the offenses. And Buddy Hield is pretty high variance. Like, if he's making his threes, you can definitely get huge games out of him. There also tend to be a lot of bad games from him where he doesn't make the threes, but he's shooting them either way. So I think if you look at average fantasy points for a guy like that, it's not going to seem as appealing, but the upside for him is massive on any given night if he knocks down his shots. So this is a game environment. Like Kyle Kuzma, I think that makes sense. I think this whole game, this is a game you want some part of for sure.
Who is Garion's guard, Garion?
Garion's guard is Josh Giddey, who is, kind of in the same spot Kyle Kuzma is. He's just everything right now for the Thunder. It's kind of funny. I mean, I was thinking about this as Matt was talking about Buddy Hield. I mean, Hield is someone who has played essentially 40 minutes a game since showing up in Indiana. We've been talking all season about, like, Nick Nurse just driving his starters into the ground. I don't know if coaches are just like terrified to lose their jobs or something, but it really does seem like everyone is just playing all of their stars all of the time the past 2 months or so. And I mean, so much so with Josh Giddey that the Thunder came out and said, we are not going to have this guy play more than 30 minutes until we hit the All-Star break. That lasted 2 games, and they immediately gave up on it, and he's played like 38 minutes the last 2 nights. So if Giddey is just going to play 39 minutes and be the point guard / shooting guard / probably best rebounder the Thunder have somehow, he's going to pay off his salary at $8,300. I think that salary is a reflection of the worry about the minutes restriction, which apparently just doesn't exist. So just roll with Josh Giddey.
Nick, where are you going in the guard department?
I was going to mention Giddey as well. Which it is hilarious that they came out and said that, and then 3 games later, it's completely out the window. Although I think the minutes restrictions and like really keeping a close eye on that is extremely, extremely overrated. Like, is there really that much of a difference between playing 34 minutes and 37 minutes? Are you dramatically increasing your injury risk? I don't really think so, but I'm not an NBA player, not an NBA coach. Who knows? On the other side of that Josh Giddey OKC matchup is DeJounte Murray, who is the obligatory mention at 11,000. Good matchup against OKC. Should actually be a pretty fun game between 2 bad teams. Stephen Curry, to me, you're getting maybe a little bit of a discount at 10,300, considering who we're talking about. Possibly, maybe back on track after hitting 8 threes the other night against the Clippers. He's hit at least 8 threes 7 times this season, but that was the first time since all the way back on December 23rd that he's accomplished that feat. 5 of his 7 games this season with at least 8 3-pointers came within the first 15 games of the year. So that kind of puts into perspective the prolonged Steph Curry slump, at least by his standards, that he has been in. But my favorite guard play, if you're going to pay up and build around this guy, is Trae Young at 9,400. Really good matchup against Orlando. Atlanta has not proven to be a good enough team that it's going to like dramatically blow out a team like Orlando when Trae Young plays 28 minutes. It should be a close enough game that he's playing into the 4th quarter. And honestly, this salary feels a couple $100 too low based on how consistent Trae Young has been carrying that offense, coming off of 41 points and 9 assists just last night against the Cavs.
All right, Gary, and as you guys have mentioned multiple times, a lot of games, tons of options. How do you feel about starting your roster construction with the value play?
Yeah, I'd have to say right now, my favorite value play is probably just Tyus Jones if Ja Morant sits. It's kind of funny that DeAnthony Melton continues to be the higher priced of these 2 guys, despite the fact that every time Ja Morant misses a game, Tyus Jones is the starting point guard. And, he's not been crazy in terms of his ceiling when he starts, but this is someone who, for his first 14 starts he's made this season, is averaging like 28 DraftKings points. So at this price point, I think if Jones is starting, you kind of just pencil him in for 6-7x value and hope that it's a good night and he brings back 10-11x value. I would also say someone who's kind of intriguing just because, as Matt was kind of alluding to, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. There's going to be a lot of like quote unquote new value that's opened up every single half hour on this slate. Quentin Grimes might kind of slip through the cracks because there's nothing going to be new about the Knicks situation. I mean, we've seen this exact situation for 3 straight games where RJ Barrett has not played and Tom Thibodeau has to sacrifice another person to the minutes gods, and he's just decided it is going to be Quentin Grimes. Quentin Grimes, you are going to play 40 minutes, and that's that because RJ Barrett was playing 40 minutes. So Grimes is $4,100. He's every time he started this season, he's basically gone off for 35 DraftKings points. So I think Grimes is a really nice play that might slip under the radar just because that situation hasn't changed at all in the last 24 hours.
All right, Nick, who's your value play tonight?
Yeah, Garion mentioned Tyus Jones, who is still at 3,100 despite a 40-plus DraftKings point game last night. It feels like DraftKings is trying to bait everyone into going with Tyus Jones. Again, I will not be falling for that bait. I think he's going to be really popular, however, if Ja Morant does sit. If that's the case, I would look at John Konchar, who played increased minutes last night, DeAnthony Melton, like Garion mentioned, even Kyle Anderson, who has some experience on the ball. I think those are all attractive pivots because if Morant sits, Jones' ownership is going to be really, really high. I would look at Aaron Wiggins in OKC. Not an exciting play whatsoever. He's at the minimum, but no SGA, no Lou Dort, no Kenrich Williams, no Ty Jerome for OKC. Those last 2 names in particular are important when it comes to Aaron Wiggins playing time. Derek White, I think, could be really valuable tonight. He's at 5,800. So not an extreme value, but Marcus Smart limped off the court last night in that game against Philly. I'd be pretty surprised if they push through and have him play on the second night of a back-to-back going into the All-Star break. So we could be looking at Derek White seeing 30-plus minutes.
Yeah, he's already made a pretty big impact there after that trade deadline acquisition. Matt, what do you want to do for a value play?
Yeah, I think you have to play someone on the Oklahoma City Thunder. There are just too many value plays here that the chances of them all being bad, or at least bad enough where none of them are in the winning lineup. Like if you're in a large field tournament and an Oklahoma City Thunder player is not in the winning lineup, that would be insane to me. There's too many guys missing. And I don't know if it's Aaron Wiggins who's going to be the best one, but let's say Alexei Pokusevsky. I'll go with him as the value play for this slate at 4K. I just think that there's going to be a pretty concentrated ownership on Wiggins, probably on Giddey, although at 8,300 maybe not. Isaiah Roby if he starts at center, and then Poku just might be overlooked a little bit because so many people are playing other guys on the Thunder. And it doesn't feel very good to make a lineup with 4 or 5 players on the worst team in the NBA in the lineup. So I think pivoting to a different player on this team makes some sense. But honestly, I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. There's just there's too many guys out, like Nick was saying. So you really just need at least one of these players, whoever it is.
Nick, let's switch up gears here real quick before you guys take off and take a gander at the DraftKings Sportsbook. Which matchup features the best bets out there?
I'll throw a couple out there quickly, and the first one is Portland to cover 11.5 at Memphis. I think that line implies that John Morant is probably going to play in this game. I don't know if that's a lock, again, with the All-Star break coming up. Grizzlies have been good on the second night of back-to-backs this season, so that is something to consider. But, again, if John Morant doesn't play, I think that certainly lowers their ceiling. Portland's won 3 straight. They're undermanned, but playing well. You know, Josh Hart has fit in seamlessly. Justice Winslow's playing really well. I think they at least make this a really competitive game. And then I really like Indiana as a 1-point favorite against Washington. It could be a really ugly game. You know, both these teams kind of gutted their rosters at the deadline. But if you look man-to-man, I think Indiana still has a markedly better team than what Washington is putting out there. Like if Kyle Kuzma is unquestionably your number one option, I think that's saying a lot. Tyrese Halliburton's fit in really well. He's playing big minutes. Buddy Hield's playing big minutes. Indiana has a ton of guys I like in the front court. And the Wizards, the cherry on top here, are a league worst 8-17-1 ATS on the road.
3 games with double-digit spreads on the slate tonight. Garion, what do you want to do here on the DK Sportsbook?
Yeah, I'm probably looking at the Timberwolves here. It's basically a pick'em, but they are home dogs tonight against the Raptors. I don't know. It just kind of rubs me the wrong way, this line. You look at Toronto across their last 10 games, they're 8-2. It's arguably been the best 10-game stretch of their season. And yet Minnesota actually has a better net rating across that same span of time. The Timberwolves are 5-0-1 ATS their last 6 home games. They've just been playing some really, really good basketball. And right now, the fact that the Raptors are favored in a game where Fred VanVleet, there's any question that Fred VanVleet might not play. I personally think he's probably more probable than questionable. He tweaked his knee in a game the Raptors were losing by 30 points and didn't return because why would he? So maybe he does end up playing in this contest. But the fact there's any doubt right now that VanVleet is playing, who has just been an on-off god for the Raptors so far this season, I think you jump on this line with Minnesota right now, and it might even move to +3. It might move to -3, -4 with Minnesota if FVV eventually gets ruled out.
Meiselman, your favorite bet here on the DK Sportsbook?
Well, we just literally found out while Garion was talking that VanVleet didn't go through shoot around. So he may still play, but yeah, I like the Wolves too in that case. And then the other one I like is I'm still just going to keep fading the Chicago Bulls. No Zach LaVine. This team doesn't have a lot of depth. I think they're missing their 2 best players, which might be blasphemy for DeMar DeRozan fans, but I think Alex Caruso and Lonzo Ball matter to this team more because of just how good they are defensively. DeRozan's a really good offensive player, but his defense doesn't stack up to those guys. So I like the Kings tonight. It was +5.5, I think, while Nick was talking, and then it moved to +5. Even at +5, I think it's still a good bet. So I'm a fan of that one. Fading the Bulls seems like a good thing to do going forward.